Welcome, everyone. My name is Tanner O'Brien. I'm a senior partner here at Action Coach Central Texas. Super quick introduction for the video here today. I've got a full replay of a session from our GrowthX conference, our annual planning conference at the end of 2024. The concept is called Bottoms Up Business Planning. So it's how to create a real plan for your business from the results that you want to achieve, backtracking into the how exactly are we going to build the plan to achieve it. So sit back, relax, enjoy this session here as we go through the entire replay of Bottoms Up Business Planning. All right, let's go ahead and jump in, kind of get through the next hour, 15 minutes or so, kind of talking about this concept of bottoms up planning, which is really going to be preparing all of us for tomorrow and some of the things that we're going to be getting into. Andy and I will be kind of bouncing back and forth as we go through this kind of presentation or just discussion here this afternoon. Feel free to throw questions in the chat box, come off mute throughout the presentation here this afternoon. We want to hear your questions. We want to make sure that this kind of connects for all of you as we go through this. And I'm sure Jody, Taylor, Andy, and I will all be kind of keeping an eye on the chat boxes as we go through here today. So with that, what are we going to be covering? We're going to be covering kind of your preparation for tomorrow, the foundation of what planning looks like in our business as we continue to move forward, building upon mastery, the process of reverse engineering, and how to build a budget. And this is all going to give us kind of the plan for tomorrow is really the whole focus behind this. So the things that we're going to talk about here today are going to be aspects of what we're going to go through tomorrow. So the idea really is to kind of teach some of the concepts so you have a conceptual knowledge of what we're going to be implementing. And then as we get into planning tomorrow, we're going to be taking what we're learning here this afternoon and actually implementing it specifically into your business. We can get a little bit more one-to-one. What does this look like specifically for your business? Things like that. So that's kind of the plan, the game plan for this afternoon. And then we'll wrap up with some questions and top learnings from the day and kind of get everything wrapped together there at the end. So with that, I'm going to let Andy talk about himself for a quick minute for those of you that don't know much about him. And then we'll keep on rolling here.
Excellent. Thanks. Does anybody not know who I am on this call or not care? Let's see a show of hands that don't care. Okay, there's the right answer. So, I'm just honored to be here. I get my energy from all of you as the coaching officer here. But look, at the end of the day, we're here to learn together. And even after 30 plus years in business, we still learn every day. And so I'm just honored to be here. And I'm looking forward to being Tanner Stickman for the next hour or so. So I will turn it back to Tanner.
I'm sure we'll get you really involved in the conversation. Not to worry. Um, for those of you that don't really know who I am, my name is Tanner O'Brien. I'm one of the senior partners here, the son of Andy and Jody, and really where my focus in the business is on finance, operations, and marketing. I spend a lot of time on kind of the data-driven things within our business. I come from a more finance and data-driven background in kind of the banking industry, number of years in kind of real estate business and economic development, a degree in psychology, which is just, it's helpful for most things, but not super relevant to exactly what I do today. But just gives you a little bit of background on what I do. But kind of why we share some of this is to give you the context of everything that we're going to walk through here today is stuff that we've learned along the way. We're going to talk about how we build budgets, how we do planning, and it's everything that we implement in our business, just like you are in yours. So when you've got questions, you're feeling a certain way, and you're like, Tanner, this stuff is really frustrating and hard to do because I've never done it before. We can empathize with that and kind of guide you through that process because it's stuff that we're also doing. It's not that we're just sitting here teaching it. We practice all of this stuff every single day. So I'm going to hand it back over to Andy. I told you I was going to get him back involved here. And for those of you that haven't seen our 6 steps framework on how we build a business, and for some of those of you that have seen it before, but maybe just need a quick refresher, have Andy kind of walk through this as the foundation for some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about here this afternoon.
Love it. Love it. All right. If you guys could see my text thread, apparently somebody took a screenshot and drew horns on it and sent me the screenshot back of my picture. So thank you so much, Adam. I'm glad that's how you feel. But let's just talk about, as we look at from chaos to control, the one thing I want to tell you 3 years ago, we went through chaos to control. We got called out on a lot of our shenanigans. When we talk about mastery is where we're going to really talk about numbers, but mastery breaks into 4 areas, right? So let's talk annual planning. Mastery is destination. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? And what are the steps we need to take? The second area of mastery, which is where I still struggle, and if it wasn't for Taylor, I drive most of you even crazier, but it's time mastery. I live and die by a calendar, but all of us that are on this call, we also need to make sure that we are masters of our time, because even a broken clock is correct twice a day. But we have to make sure we're doing the right things at the right time. Now, let's talk. It says financial mastery, but the real thing is mastery of numbers, not just your financials, not just revenue, not just GP. But what we're going to go through today is going to give you another deep dive into other numbers we must know in the business so that you can make logical decisions in your business every day, from marketing to operations to sales to finance to IT to HR, right? How do we take the emotion out of it? And then finally, delivery mastery. Are all of our products and services being delivered the same way every time? That leaves a wow experience. Once we have a good grip on that, then we move into niche or marketing, right? Niche is predictable cash flow. When we look at that, we also talk guarantees. We talk about 10 by 10 marketing. We talk about cash flow strategies, cash gap strategies. We talk about things that go into marketing, which I'm not going to go deep because we're going to be talking about that and the mastery of numbers later. Then we move from that level to effective efficiencies. We talk about leverage through systems and processes. We know today that we manage to standard and we manage to process, we lead through behavior. Leverage is about doing ever more with ever less. And we could sit here and I can do the 2-hour presentation in my sleep on leverage about divide to multiply. And we're going to show you some of that today. But the idea is people, systems, accounting, test and measure, and other people's money. Those are the 5 areas of leverage that we talk about in business. And as we look at the things we're going to go through today, we're going to get really, really granular on a system and a process that allows your business to function without you. Because now we add team in. How many of you guys on this call have ever hired somebody and you thought it was going to be the greatest hire ever, and it was the worst hire you've ever had? Every one of us raised our hands. We've all done it, including myself. We talk about team as structure for growth. How do we build systems and processes and train the team to do the jobs that we need to get ourselves out of? Once we get there, we have the synergy, right? General manager. And then once we get through that, we have a well-oiled machine. And now once we have that, do we sell the business? Do we have passive income? Do we have mailbox money? Whatever the term is you guys want to look at, but we know every business, if you're a $100,000 business or even a $500 million business, these are the steps we're going to take all of you through. So this is the framework we're going to be going through today. Any questions? All right, going once, going twice. All right, sold to Tanner.
So super clear, right? As you mentioned, this is the framework that we build business upon, and it's going to tie us all the way back to how do we build a plan for this next year. So one thing I want to just kind of keep in your mind as we walk through this process, when we talk about the 6 steps framework, it's designed a certain way. So if you look at that picture that's up on the screen, it's not designed as a ladder. It's not designed as like one thing's on top of one another. It's designed as a pyramid. Those bottom 2 layers are much larger than the top layers, and that's on purpose, right? The level of work that we put into mastery, the level of work that we put into niche, or the marketing and sales side of our business, allows us to create the path for leverage in team and ultimately synergy or scale. So it's important to kind of understand that. And if that's the case, how well do we understand what mastery is in the business, which is really where a lot of our planning process comes in. And that's really what we're going to get into here today. So let's talk a little bit about mastery. What does mastery really mean? I was taught a long time ago that the language of business or the language of investing was numbers. Has anyone else ever heard that before? The language of business is numbers. I've seen a couple hands. It was really kind of internalizing and thinking about this. And when it comes to mastery, Andy just talked about the kind of four distinct areas of mastery being destination, delivery, time, and then kind of money or finance mastery. So as we kind of walked through this, mastery really is all about your investment thesis and the allocation of resources. So let me explain. 25% of kind of this mastery bucket, that foundation of your business, is really the outcome or return that we look to achieve within the business, and then building the outline to get there. That is destination. It's what is the return of the outcome that we want to get to, and how are we going to get there, right? So that's 25%. The other 25%, delivery, is really the underlying value of the asset. What is the value that we are providing to our target market, right? The market that we serve out there with our product or service, what is the value that we provide to them? That is kind of the underlying value of the business. So that leaves 50% of mastery then is the allocation of available resources, with the two resources primarily being time and money. So when we start thinking about how we get into planning, it's going to be how do we allocate both our time and our money as resources to achieve the desired outcome that we want to achieve in the next 90 days, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Okay. So that was kind of the overall concept of why mastery is so important. Everything that we build upon comes back down to this concept of mastery. So if numbers is the language of business, and these are kind of some things when it comes to the investment thesis, then it might be time that we start thinking like professional investors. So if I were to sit here and say, if you were a professional investor, what would you do? Or why would you hire a professional investor to manage your money? Well, answers typically come from, they track data, they review trends, they read the numbers, they want to make sure that they make the best possible decisions to get the best possible return of, and then the return on investment. You all here are a part of an investment or own an investment, right? The business itself is an investment. So if we can take ourselves out and start thinking about how do we look at it from the same frame, we can look at how do we build a plan that's going to achieve us the desired results that we're looking to achieve. So, because of that, mastery becomes the foundation that everything else is built upon, and mastery must be mastered, which is the whole purpose of kind of what we're going to be getting into when it comes to planning. Is everyone kind of following me so far on kind of the thesis that we're putting together on the concept of mastery? Seeing some nods of heads.
And
Uh,
Tanner, I think it's also important for those of you that are employees in businesses. This is a course in how do we take ourselves out of the employee in the business and look at it from the role, responsibility, and step outside of the work that we have to do every day. So this is relative to everything that we do.
yeah, and on that point, as we get into proper planning, right? The plan shouldn't ever really be only at the top level, only with the business owner, only with the general manager or the CEO. There should be input and things within departments and different kind of components within the business. Everyone's responsible for the overall outcome of the business. So this really is a collective thing to walk through. So before we get into kind of the actual planning side of things and how do we do this, let's talk a little bit about investing our resources. So we have the two resources that I mentioned. There's time and there's money. And Andy took you through kind of some basic things on like time mastery and like we got to know some of our numbers and financials. And I know we had some really good sessions this morning that talked a lot about some of these different concepts and how we run these through the business. So when we think about these two resources, if I were to come to each of you today and say, hey, let's go ahead and start this new venture within our business. Maybe it's opening up a new product line. Maybe it's launching a new marketing channel. Maybe it's expanding location, right? How many of you would say, I've got the financial budget to be able to take on something new? So far, not seeing many hands. I've seen a couple. Okay, beautiful. How many of you would say, I have the time budget? whether it's team time or my time, to be able to go invest in something new? Not seeing very many hands on that one. So let me ask you a different question. How many of you feel like you have no time? There's some hands. All right. So have no time. Now, for those of you that raised their hands and said, "Hey, I feel like I have no time," how many of you also would keep your hand up if your business is not producing the end desired result that you want out of the business today? And the key point here that I want you to write down is, if that is the case, if we are out of time and we are not achieving the desired result possible, then we are allocating that resource in the wrong areas. So when we get into building our plan, the purpose is that we start looking for the best opportunities, the best places to get a return on both money and on time. So we got to think of them both as resources that we're allocating as we build out our budget and our forecast and our overall plan for the next year. Does that make sense? Seems some nods. Who's really excited about this so far? Awesome. So as we get through this, it's we got to start thinking about this shift to measure and test. I'm guessing many of you that are in coaching have heard the words test and measure quite a bit. Personally, I'm a big fan of flipping that to measure and then test. And it really becomes this, has anyone heard the measure twice, cut once? Why is that true? Why do we measure twice and cut once? Why is it not the other way around?
Save money and save time.
Save money and save time. Why else?
So you don't waste your material. So you don't cut it wrong and waste it.
Yeah, waste of like making mistakes, right? That the risk of making a mistake when we go and cut first and then decide to measure something, not easily the most effective way to go about it. So in our business, it's very similar. So I'm a big fan of like measuring things first and then testing. So I'm guessing many of you got some emails from Taylor earlier this week saying, "Hey, we're going to need you to bring your financial numbers and your sales numbers and your marketing numbers and all of these types of things." Some even saying, "I don't even know what those are yet," and that's okay. But we got to get to this point of measuring first and then being able to test different things, right? So measure, manage, move is kind of the adage from I think it's Peter Drucker. We have to measure first, and what we measure we can actually manage, and then once we manage we can actually move those results. It's only when we have this in place and we have the plan in place that we're measuring and managing, then we can start looking at kind of the concept of more, better, new. We can do more of the things that are working, continue to improve them, do more of it, do better, do more, do better until we can't do anymore, and then we can focus on doing something new. And this is ultimately how we start the process of scaling a business. It's a process of how we start building our annual plan for the future. All right. Before we get into the fun stuff, any questions on kind of the foundation of kind of the core concepts of what we're going to be building upon when we get into our planning here today? Or clarification points? Anything that's not clear to you that I can answer? We have the most interactive group in the world today. This is amazing.
Did they all eat like really heavy food or whatever? Did you all go out for steak or some stuff like that? Your brain's just shut down?
No, it just means you're crystal clear.
Oh,
I will take that. I will
Wow.
take that. So, as we kind of progress through here, then, so that's the framework, that's the foundation that we're kind of building off of. So, what we want to do now is think about, how does this actually work in practice? How do we start thinking through this in terms of building our plan and the different components that come along with it? So, the 5 ways. Everybody familiar with the 5 ways? It's leads, conversion rate equals customers times average dollar sale number of transactions gets us revenue, profit margins, and then profit, right? Some of you may have seen that several times, others that maybe I heard it once and might need a refresher. That's okay. But it's a way that we can start thinking about, how do we start planning things within the business, and knowing our numbers allows us to play the game with it. So we're going to review a quick example. We're going to talk about some things that we can or should be measuring within the business. What does it mean to go into channel level? And then how do we start this process of reverse engineering? So I want you to take a look at this next screen here. On the left, you have kind of the traditional 5 ways that we traditionally teach, right? Leads times conversion rate gets customers, customers times number of transactions and average dollar sale, and so on. On the right-hand side, you have something that's slightly different. What do you see when you take a look at this? What's different about these two models? And yes, you have to come off mute and talk now.
It's getting more detailed from your MQL to your, you can see where it's converting, and be able to pick it apart there.
Absolutely. Detail and being able to pick a few things apart. Amazing. What else do you all see? What stands out to you?
I kind of see that your average sale is very different. Like, I don't know if you're trying, if these are like 1-to-1, but like maybe you're validating the numbers that you thought you had on the left.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And to be clear, it's not they're not the same example on each one. But yes, looking at very different things within the model, right? So on the one hand, it's very kind of high level. You know, we can see leads and conversion rate gets customers, but we don't really know what's happening between there. So we can get a little bit more granular. We can start breaking things out to see what specifically can we control, right? So that's one example here. What about this? What's different? What do you see different now?
Well, they went crazy with Excel.
That could be one true answer. Absolutely.
We're now comparing to standards.
Aha, comparing to standards. What is a standard?
Maybe something you establish in your business, a baseline.
Established from baseline,
A benchmark.
benchmark. In this case, plan. This is plan versus actual. So when we start thinking about how do we plan and why is that important, we can actually build out the metrics to model not just, oh, I'm going to achieve this in the next year or the next month or the next week. I can see what's happening compared to plan and then have a highlight. Where am I on plan? Where am I off plan? It allows us to ask some questions.
But one of these is showing a quarter versus a month too. So we're seeing 2 different snapshots at 2 different times.
So you're seeing, yes, great point out on this one, because this particular one shows us right in on this screen is August and Q3 to date. So I can see where we at in August and where we at so far altogether in the quarter. So I can see kind of 2 different timelines all at once and say like what's happening between these two, and allows us to kind of start asking some different questions.
Is there some type of a legend that explains what all these acronyms are?
On this particular thing, no, because it's just a screenshot of a much larger report that we look at. But it does beg the question of like, what are we measuring and why are we measuring it, right? So that was kind of like point number two on this piece here, which is what are we specifically measuring? So this is showing primarily marketing and sales data, and we've got MQL, SQL, diagnostics booked, things like that. That's what was internal for our business. RR is recurring revenue versus single sales, which is SS. So it gives us kind of a different context of different things. Now, why this is important for us to kind of think through is this might be wildly different for your business. If I've got an e-commerce business that has, some marketing metrics, but people primarily go to a landing page and then actually buy right there, add to cart and then buy, you're not necessarily going to have all the different things that we have here, right? So it's going to be individualistic to what your specific business is and kind of what that sales process looks like. The point of illustrating it this way is to give you an example of what are all the things that happen between somebody saying, I'm interested in what you do and I'm ready to buy, so that we can determine what's happening in between that entire funnel.
So Tanner, can we push pause there for 1 second? We will be going in depthly with some of these definitions. for the future and for tomorrow. And you've heard me say, when we look at MQL, it is a marketing qualified lead. SQL is a sales qualified lead. These are terms that we'll use in every business all the time. And we, like I said, we talk in a lot of acronyms, Kathy. And for those of you that have been with us a little bit longer, it takes a little bit to get a hold of, but we will get these spelled out so everybody has them.
Okay. And can I also say that, and this will look different for each business of how you decide you're going to define it.
Yeah. And I've got an example that we're going to walk through here in a few minutes. I'll kind of give a more individual example of kind of what that looks like without using marketing qualified and sales qualified. The purpose is, what are all the steps that are happening and what can I be tracking so that I can start making different decisions within the business. That's ultimately the purpose of this here. So what do we measure? Looking at a couple different examples, and then let's talk really quickly about channel level reporting versus macro level reporting. Now, I only want to hit on this kind of high level today because it's going to make more sense as we get into more specifics in your individual business tomorrow when we get into planning. But what I showed you here on these kind of last few slides, this is macro level reporting. In other words, this is every single lead that came into the business. Here's what happened. Channel level reporting then would be by marketing channel, what's happening? Is my conversion rate from Facebook leads different than from referrals? Probably, very, very cold leads when it comes through Facebook, but if somebody refers me, that's a very warm lead. So the conversion rates might be different. So when we started looking at kind of a planning process, starting with the macro level and getting more detailed is a great place to start. Long term, we want to be able to break this into what specifically is happening at each marketing channel and each sales channel that we're using, so that we can get into this process of properly reverse engineering and talking about what specifically needs to be done on a daily, weekly, monthly basis in your business to be able to achieve the plan that you set out. So that's really all I'm going to say on channel level for today. But as we get into this, keep that in mind because it'll make sense and it'll apply to you as you kind of master through this over the next 24 hours when we get into planning, and then over the course of like the next year, and you get really, really good at the planning process. Fair enough? Cool. So let's talk about building a plan and the process of reverse engineering. So I'm going to take us through kind of an example here today. So stop me if any of this doesn't make sense. If you're confused on the math that we're about to go through, please stop me and let me know. But I wanted to make this kind of as ideally as simple as possible. But we're going to start from the very, very bottom. So this is reverse engineering, saying I need $20,000 in sales. Now, for you, you could say I need $20,000 in sales next year, next quarter, next month, next week, tomorrow, whatever like your number needs to be or that timeline needs to be, you can choose. But on a specific timeline, we need $20,000 worth of sales. Now, a number that we need to know is, on average, what is the average dollar sale or the average order volume, which is AOV? How much on average do our customers spend with us each time they do a transaction? In this particular example, it's going to be $1,000. Okay, everybody with me so far? Cool. So that would be like, if you guys start tracking something, that would be one thing to start tracking. So then we can do some math. 20,000 divided by 1,000 says that we need 20 sales in order to get $20,000. Make sense? Seeing some nods. Y'all are super excited that we're doing math now. All right. So we're starting backwards, right? So we came up with a financial dollar amount and said, how do we get the 20,000? Well, we need 20 sales in this case, based on our historical data. There's a key for you to remember. Historical data. It's not a guess. It's, I know that our average dollar sales is $1,000, so that's the number I need to use for my planning. All right. So each of these is just going to be a progression of kind of this thing. So you'll see the bottom is exactly the same, and then we add a few more things to it. So $20,000 in sales, average dollar sale at $1,000, 20 sales needed. All right, well, what comes before that? Well, sales meetings come before sales. Got to have a sales meeting in this particular case. Okay, cool. What's our average conversion rate? So for this example, it's 40%. So 40% conversion rate. Now, again, this should be historical data. So you should be able to go back and say, okay, I had this many sales last month or last year, and we had this many sales meetings. What was my conversion rate there? Could be 80%, could be 60%, whatever your number is what you're going to want to put in. But again, historical numbers is the point. So we take our 20 sales that we need, and we're going to divide it by the 40% that is our current conversion rate. And that tells us that we need 50 sales meetings. Okay, cool. Well, what comes before sales meetings? Well, I got to book a sales meeting. All right, so we can take a step back and say, I need to book sales meetings. Well, I know that my show rate is 75%. On average, 75% of the meetings that I book actually show up to the sales meeting. So we can reverse engineer that and say 50% divided by 75% gives us 67 sales meetings. That's how many I have to book in order to achieve 20 sales. Make sense? Questions? I know I'm adding on a lot more math now. Does anyone here love the math as much as I do? Or is it just me? Stephanie
Awesome.
does. Awesome. So you're all with me so far. If not, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right. So we don't stop there because we have to do something to book sales meetings. All right. So from sales meetings booked, then we need to know, well, what comes before that? In this example, it's prospect calls. Now, it could be something different for you and your business. This is likely where we start to see some deviation based on your sales process. But I wanted to at least kind of give you some examples here. So let's say it's prospect calls. All right, well, what's my booking rate on average historically been from prospect call to booking the next sales meeting? In this case, we said 40%. So we run 67 divided by 40% gives us 167.5, or really rounded up to 168 because you can't have half of a meeting. So 168 prospect calls. Cool. What comes before that? Well, I need to connect with leads. Beautiful. What's my connection rate from somebody who fills in a form, as an example, and I have their contact information? What's my connect rate to just connect with them? In this case, let's call it 20%, which means we backtrack into now 838 leads is the number of leads that I actually have to go at. So already we can kind of take a step back and say, all right, in order to get 20 sales, that's going to get me $20,000 in actual dollars, right? I need to go have 838 people fill out a form that gives me their contact information. I now have an action item that I can go start to get some semblance of what to do. Now, for this particular case, let's take it back to some level of, say, paid ad, as an example. Could be Google ads, could be Facebook ads, something else like that, that drives to a landing page. I just want to take it all the way back from click to close if I could. So leads, let's say it's landing page views or conversion. Well, it's a 5% conversion rate on a landing page. So 838 divided by 5% gets us 16,760 views on our landing page is what we need. Cool. Well, what about clicks? Because clicks from the ad come before that. Well, let's say that's 5%. Well, now I need 335,000 clicks. It's kind of generally how the math is going to go out. But what this does is when we look at this entire process, we've now been able to reverse engineer using our historical data. This is not a guess. This is, I know my information from before, regardless of if it's good or bad, does not matter. We put in our historical conversion numbers and we can backtrack into, if I want $20,000 in my bank account this next month, I need to go get 335,000 clicks from my ads. Now what do I need to go do? We can figure out the activity required. This also begs the question of, is that realistic? And this is a huge key point as we get into annual planning tomorrow. Oftentimes it can be very easy to start building a plan based on, well, I want to achieve this, so we're just going to say it's going to happen, without doing this math to say, based on what we've been able to do in the past, is it actually feasible, or is that just a guess and a hope? This tells us exactly what we can do based on what we've done in the past.
Tanner, I just want to add, for someone who actually does clicks and pay-per-click ad campaigns. Well, I don't actually do it. I hire someone to do it, but my company does. And the numbers here, it all makes sense. But there's also the aspect of it's not just one big knob. You can just turn up the spending and then automatically you're just going to get more clicks and that's going to lead to sales. Just to some degree, maybe, but there's also the quality of ads and like how many of irrelevant clicks do you get. So it's a simplified model. It makes sense, but I wish there was a big dial I can just crank it up.
100%. And that's a really, really good note. Because the reality is this is still a fairly simplistic model. Now, this is more detailed than just the straight leads, conversion rate, customers. But to Hawkins' point, especially when you start getting into digital marketing and being able to test a bunch of different stuff, there's a lot more to it than just clicks and conversions. You got to test different keywords and a whole bunch of different stuff there. But it gives us kind of the framework of how we think about it. And that's kind of the purpose of this today. Again, your channel may look different. This is an example of going all the way back to something that gets clicks, but imagine doing the same type of math for networking events. And you backtrack it all the way to how many networking events do I go to and how many people am I connecting with? Like that's something I can control in a week to be able to say, if I want to do more or have a bigger result, I need to go do this activity. And that's really the purpose behind kind of thinking through this model. But yes, in each individual channel, there's likely some additional pieces that we're going to need to track and measure in order to get to what specifically can we do versus just, well, I know this information, so now let's just say we crank up the spend or whatever it is to get there. Little bit more to it at that point. But the purpose is thinking through how do we reverse engineer to say, if I want to achieve this result, what are all the things that have been true in the past that are likely going to be true again in the future? And what numbers are going to be required in order to achieve the end result? And then Andy, did you have something to add? Where'd he go? Thought he said something. No? Okay. So, gold nugget, kind of a couple things to note from kind of this process is, Andy talked earlier about leverage and the process of divide to multiply. So this is an example of what divide to multiply means kind of in real life. Dividing out each thing to be able to say, what specifically can we control? What specifically do we need to do, right? So we go back to this as an example. When we get into our planning, maybe this isn't realistic, but I still need to achieve that end result. Now we can start looking at, well, let's see, the connection rate's really low. It's only at 20%. What can I do specifically, or what can I do with the team to increase that from 20% to 25% or 22%? And how does that affect the entire model? So now we can get into something very specific and very granular that we can actually do something with and make plans around versus just, I need more leads. It's still hard to kind of get into getting more leads from which channel. How do we get the leads? Like what quality of leads? There's so many different questions to ask. Getting into this level allows us to divide that out and say, what specifically can I change? Which pieces are the largest bottleneck that's going to allow me to influence and improve over the next time period? So this measurement allows us to ask why. What is causing the result that we are getting? Whether it's a positive result, a neutral result, or a negative result, we can start to think about what can be improved, what can be replicated. Like if we have really good results in one area, how do we replicate that so that we can do more of it this next year? If there's an area that's kind of underperforming or even performing fairly well, but we believe it can be improved, like what areas specifically can we get into? And then, where do we need to delete things that just aren't working today? Andy talked about some of our history. We went back and year and a half ago, started to look at every lead channel. So, networking, referrals, strategic partners, Facebook ads, LinkedIn outreach. Like we looked at every single channel that we had and found that we had 4 of like the 10 that we were doing that actually produced positive results consistently. So we dropped the other 6 and said, all we're going to do is focus on the ones that work, and the business grew as a result. because we were able to measure and manage some of these things here. The next big one is the plan realistic? Is this something that we can do, right? I remember sitting down and doing this exercise for the first time for our business, and it was something like, I don't know, like 2,000 leads or something like that in a month that we needed to get. It was like, we've never, ever cracked that many. I don't know anyone in Action Coach that's ever cracked that many. So it's like we had an unrealistic expectation just because we said we wanted to achieve a certain goal. So it gave us the clarity of what actually is realistic and what can we do based on the numbers that are true for us and not just an assumption of what's been true for others. Looking for the biggest constraints so that we can ultimately solve the right problem, which then leads us into building a true business plan, something that we can build based on managing activity. So taking that example before, being able to take that back and say, all right, we're going to do that for networking now. I can backtrack all the way to how many networking events do I have to go to every single week in order to be successful? Or how many does my team need to go to? Now I can manage the activity that's going to lead to the downstream results versus just a hope and a prayer that we achieve these goals from this one channel. It was a lot of information in a short period of time. So before we get into kind of how this relates into the financial budget side of things, what questions y'all have? What clarifying points would you like me to go a little bit deeper on?
And I think it'd be helpful for everybody here if you would clarify on how long did it actually take us to actually be able to gather the data? Because I don't want people to feel overwhelmed or out of their depth or have this be any judgment, shame, or guilt that they don't know these numbers today. So I want to give them historically from our standpoint. How long did it take us to gather this data?
Yes. In some regards, we're still collecting it. We started this journey 3 years ago. That being said, I'd say, generally speaking, to get a good base understanding of the numbers that we can influence, it took us 6 to 8 weeks of consistent measuring. Not trying to change things, not trying to influence them, just measure so we could see what was actually happening in the business. It's a progressive component of our journey into business ownership and leading within a business. It's not something that happens overnight. It's a, what are the 1 or 2 things I can start tracking this next week, and then once I've got that pretty consistent, let's add on a few more, and we just continue to build upon that until we start to have kind of the semblance of what is the dashboard of numbers that I'm managing and looking at consistently. So it is a progressive thing. It is not going to happen overnight. Do not feel overwhelmed by it. It's a matter of just taking 1 or 2 as we continue to progress through that.
Thank you, Tanner.
Stephanie asked, how often do you update your standard, update the plan as you see the new data coming in? Yes. So the short answer is as frequently as is necessary. It kind of comes down to how frequently are we looking at it. So in our business today, I look at our stuff daily, minimum weekly, financial and marketing. So if we see that we are consistently off plan, whether it's because we're not doing the activity or realistically, especially in the last year or two, as we learned through this process, we didn't have the budget correct. We were wrong, right? We were still learning the process of budgeting. The historical numbers weren't 100% accurate. So we're using, cleaning the data as we go. So realistically, it could be as early as weekly. More often than not, it usually would be a monthly basis. We would kind of update and say, what is the new projection of the plan need to be? How do we need to update this for next month? If we set a standard for 200 leads and we're consistently getting 50, either we need to figure out what's causing that, or, hey, we just got the number wrong based on the resources that we have. Next month, we're going to adjust all of the numbers according to the results that we actually got, and we start to update that plan in real time. Great question. Other questions?
I got one.
Yeah.
So we're talking a lot about reverse engineering into, say, the quantity of clicks, the quantity of networking events, and you have given a great example of your business using the 10 things that you were doing. Mm-hmm. That's great. Logically, I understand the math. I understand the thought process. Cool. we haven't spent a dime on marketing. We have nothing to track. We have nothing to historically look back at. Everything's been word of mouth and natural growth and cool and all. But when it comes time to grow and start investing in marketing, where do I start?
So I'll answer that first by saying you have spent a lot of money in marketing. You just don't know it. The reality is it's your time that's being invested, not necessarily dollars. So now that time could have been invested in taking really, really, really good care of the clients and customers that you currently work with that they want to refer you. It could be that you've been out and about and you've been talking about what you do just in natural social settings, but there is a time component of what you've done that if you put a dollar figure to your dollars per hour, essentially, you would have some sort of investment there. Um, First piece is, one, is that something that you can scale today? So being able to track each of those components, if you've got clients that are coming in that are completely word of mouth, how specifically did they hear from you or hear about you? Was it because they were told from a previous client? Was it somebody that worked with you in the past? Was it somebody that just kind of got to know you in the past but never did business with you? Starting to get some of those data points will allow you then to say, can we do more of that or not? If the answer is yes, then let's maximize that until we can't do it anymore. If the answer is no, like that's kind of the max we're going to get out of it, then let's focus on what's the next closest thing that we have data on. So in that case, it might be, word of mouth and it's more referral-ish based. Then, what's a lead channel that approximates that same type of things? That might be strategic partners that can refer you consistently. How do I develop those relationships with strategic partners? Could be networking, where you meet people and they refer you based on those conversations, right? So you can look at for synergistic stuff first, that you can start getting similar data points. And then as those continue to spin off additional profit, it gives you the ability to invest in testing different channels that may be more leveraged, say as paid ads or something else like that. But you want to be able to create a profitable testing budget to be able to test the things that you don't have data in specifically yet. Does that kind of make sense?
It makes sense. I just see it challenging and hard to go. 50% of my leads came from drunken shenanigans at the bar, and the other 25% came from, Joe at the water feeder. You know what I mean?
I think it's obvious. He just needs to go to the bar more.
Yeah.
How many dollars in drinks does it take to get X number of leads? Yes, I love that. Yes, and you're right. With those type of things, it's harder to track. It's still trackable, but it's a lot harder. The things that are super easy are the things that we spend money on, and especially the ones that are digital. But we start in one place and we start to build on some of the things that we have. And realistically, I can still only speak kind of generally for everybody on the call today, and that's where getting into the planning process for tomorrow, we can start to kind of parse out, which lead channels are specific to your business that is working or not working, or how do we start getting some of the data that we need to be able to scale different components of it. It's a little bit more of an individualized conversation based on where you are in business and what's happening there.
See, I totally understand that because it's the same for us. Like we don't, send out advertising. We don't have any of that stuff. And ours isn't even referred customers to us. Ours is literally just, talking to the people that we've already worked with, or, okay, we're done with this project. And then just literally going through, all your contacts and like, hey, where's, do you guys got work, or kind of what's going on? So it's all literally just like word of mouth and calling the people that in the industry. So we're kind of having a hard time also with like, tracking.
Yeah. So I'm gonna pause you super quick because I want to hit on this point for everybody on the call. By and large, I want you to completely remove word of mouth from your vocabulary. It's not actually a thing. Either you have referrals or you have people that you're talking to. It's one of the two. So Maria, in your case, right, you've got people that you're reaching out to. It might be a repeat business that you're reaching back out to and saying, hey, is there anything that we can work on today? But you're doing warm outreach is essentially what that is. So you're going through your contact list, your database, and being able to reach out one-to-one to say, I'm doing marketing. I'm spending my own time, no dollars, my own time into that as a marketing channel. And there's still the same downstream numbers of I reached out to this many people, I connected with this many of them, this many of them moved on to the next conversation, and kind of whatever downstream metrics are for that. So it really kind of think through what is the actual outreach mechanism. And sometimes that my outreach is talking to my current customers. And how often do I need to talk to my current customers for them to refer somebody to me? And there's still something that we can quantify there. We just may have to think a little bit deeper in terms of kind of what are the levels that come along with it.
So Tanner, what would you call it then when you have an existing customer, you've not asked them to do anything, or they just purchase something and they're happy with it and they tell somebody else, and then that potential customer reaches out to you to say, hey, my good friend or my business partner, whatever, told me about this product and we would like to buy that as well. What would you classify that as if it's not word of mouth?
So that would still be referrals. So it's somebody that's done business
Oh,
from
okay.
you.
So it's like unpaid referrals.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. Okay.
So it's still, yes, they're still referring you. There's still a process that's happening. And like I said, everyone's business can be a little bit different in terms of how many times you need to remind your customers to refer you. Sometimes you don't need to remind them, right? Or maybe it's like I need to, on average, say something about referrals twice a month to my 1,000 customers, and I only need to say something, literally say it twice, not each one, just twice in general, and we get 1 or 2 referrals, right? So there's some things that we can correlate there, but it just comes down to referral in that particular piece.
Cool. Thank you.
Phenomenal questions. Other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, we will move on to kind of the next component that'll bring this all together as we get into the stuff for annual planning tomorrow. But how do we start bringing this into the financials and the business plan side of things? So we have to start with this whole concept of building a budget and a forecast. Who here has built a budget for their business in the past? Who here has regularly looked at their budget for their business? Okay, cool. So I like to kind of talk through the process of creating a budget and kind of what are some things that we can be thinking of. There's kind of some traditional ways to look at it, and then I'm a big fan of making sure that we have profit. So looking at it from kind of some different components when it comes to profit. So typically, what I would do when we get into building a budget, it's building the expense budget first, looking at historicals. What's our profit plan? Like, what's the minimum desired or acceptable profit in the business, or kind of what's my goal profit? And then looking at income, whether it's book revenue, which is essentially revenue that we know is coming in regardless. So think membership, subscriptions, things like that. We know that there's going to be something coming in based on the current client base that we have. What's the attrition of that? One of the things that's almost always forgotten when it comes to budgeting. And then what's the new sales that we need in order to achieve that? So each of you should, if you haven't yet received it, you will receive something that looks like this for tomorrow. This is just a basic budget versus actual spreadsheet that we can start filling out kind of the basics of building your budget. But it comes down to like, how do we start building this kind of from scratch? So like I said, I like to start with budgets, and I'm going to do or share a couple screens here of kind of conceptually how we think about this. And yes, for each of your businesses, it may be a little bit more detailed than what's on here. But again, just want to give you the concepts of how we think about it, and we'll get into more specifics with your individual business as we walk through the planning process tomorrow. So I like to start with expenses. And expenses really just being, what are all the expenses from last year? So if we're looking at that budget sheet, this one here, it's literally filling this thing out by month. What were my expenses? What were my marketing fees? What was my office supplies and cleaning fees and rent and wages and all that kind of stuff, and start to fill that in month over month. Like literally, if you could copy what it was last year, paste it into this, and then start to look through what's likely to continue to be true for this next year. what's likely going to go up or what's going to change because, I know that I got to notice that my, business insurance is going up by $5 a month or, whatever it is, and start to make those tweaks. So we start with the basics. What was true last year? What's likely to continue to be true this year? And plot all of that out. So image on the screen now, very, very simple. Just, wages, rent, software, et cetera, et cetera. Like put in kind of some basic stuff here. From there, I like to go into net income, profitability. What profit do I want or need to achieve in that time period? So in this case, let's assume it's a month. I set the net income minimum standard at $5,000. Need to hit at least 5,000. All right, so I know my expenses are 30K. My net income is gonna be 5K. All right, now let's take a step back and go, what's my book revenue? And as I said before, book revenue is essentially all the revenue that is going to be coming in regardless, the things that you already know about. I've got a client base of 10 people that are on subscription, and those 10 people are going to continue to pay me next month and the month after that. And it's pretty consistent. Like I know that that's going to come in. So we put that in. Let's say that's 15,000 for this particular case. Well, then we need to figure out what new sales are then going to be required. So if I know I have 15K coming in and I'm going to have 30K going out, I want to achieve 5,000, then what needs to be true for new sales? So we just do the basic math, and that's the $30,000 in expense plus the $5,000 worth of profit means that we have to cover $35,000 total in income. Well, I know we have 15,000 coming in, so I can take that off of the 35. So our delta is going to be $20,000 in sales. So we bring that up to the new sales number at the top, and we can ask ourselves, is this realistic? Is this achievable? And I know kudos to me when I was putting this out because I did them separately and ended up being the same number that we used for this example earlier. Just I need $20,000 worth of new sales. So we take that new sales number and we plug it into the model that we talked about before, which is how do we now reverse engineer to say, what specifically do we need to go do to achieve the sales numbers required? Because when it comes to starting to manage the business, and if I were to come to you and say, hey, are you on budget or not? And you say yes or no. Let's say you say no. I'm off budget. I'm not hitting the profitability that I want. The question's not going to be, okay, what was the income or the sales? It's going to be, why are we off? What's causing it? What are the things that are getting in the way? And we get into this, which allows us to say, well, I had the leads that I needed, but I just didn't get as many sales meetings booked. Or I got the sales meetings booked and I had 50 sales meetings, but my conversion rate to sale just went way down. Or I sold, 20 people, but my average dollar sale was only $500 instead of 1,000, right? We can start getting into what specifically is the component that we can address that allows us to get back on plan. Does that make sense? Andy, what additional notes do you have on this component?
It's literally just that we have to start tracking somewhere, and we just got to be able to be open, honest with ourselves, our business, and to look at what it's going to take to get to the next level, right? It's not about me. It's not about Tanner. It's about where are we at today? How do we measure something that we've never measured before? And how do we do it without judging ourselves? Without shame, without guilt, with all these things, because that's not what we're here for. Every one of you are great operators, great business owners, great employees, but we are all really good at giving ourselves shame, guilt, judgment over something we don't know. And that's not the purpose of this today.
To kind of jump on that a little bit, the numbers are non-judgmental. The numbers are just what they are. It's okay. We're all at different phases. We'll be at different phases in the future, and we're at different places in the past. The numbers are what they are, and it takes what it takes to get the result that you're looking for. When we don't have the information required and we don't see all of these things, it becomes very difficult for us to make any decisions. And when we can't make decisions because we don't have the data, that's when we feel frustrated. That's when we feel anxious. That's when we feel potentially depressed that we can never hit the goals that we set for ourselves. The more data that we have, the more information we look at, the more we break this stuff down into what specifically can we control, the easier it is to make decisions within the business that allows you to be on that path. And as we kind of ascend up the 6 steps in building the business, this is where we start looking at, systemizing the business to say, now, because we know these things, because we know the activity level that's required to achieve the goals, we can set the KPIs for the team and for each position and start to get really detailed on what, if I have a team member and I can share with them, this is what success looks like, and this is exactly how you can measure yourself against success, their ability to execute upon that and have so much fun doing it because they know how to be successful in the role versus having some ambiguous, I'm not quite sure what this means. That clarity leads to so much more positive action inside of the business. So numbers are what they are, and it takes what it takes. The process of reverse engineering, macro level, and then eventually by channel level, allows us to determine the how we're going to achieve the results within our plan. So as we bring this all together and get into planning tomorrow, we're going to take kind of this concept that we went through, and we're going to start putting numbers to it. Whatever data you have today, now it could be all the stuff I showed, it could be a portion of the stuff I showed today, but whatever data you have, you're going to want to have with you so we can start getting as close to accurate as possible in building out your plan. Start walking through, how do we start building the budget side of things? What specifically is it going to take to be able to achieve the numbers that you want out of this next year? And have a lot of fun kind of doing that together as a group with those of us, Andy, Jody, myself, being able to kind of walk around and work through that specifically with you and your business.